Gain-of-function research was going on in that lab, and NIH funded it.
Remember when Senator Rand Paul accused Anthony Fauci of funding China's Wuhan virus lab?
I totally resent the lie that you are now propagating.
The media immediately criticized Senator Paul.
Rand Paul, stop it. You look like an idiot.
Dr. Anthony Fauci blasting Senator Rand Paul.
Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about.
Anthony Fauci once again forced to call Rand Paul a sniveling moron. But some now have changed. Major shift. NIH admits funding risky research in Wuhan. Paul might have been onto something.
To me, it's not so much about them admitting or apologizing. It's really about trying to prevent this from happening again in the future.
Paul also pushed the then controversial idea that COVID began with a lab leak.
All the evidence is pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself.
Did COVID leak from this lab, which did experiments funded by the U.S. government? The media told us, no, COVID came from an animal.
The working theory is someone butchered a bat, came into contact with its blood or urine, and then touched his or her nose or mouth.
Everybody was saying came from animals, from bats.
I initially was there too. Then there became reports of 80,000 animals being tested, no animals with it.
No animals with COVID, but
we know that 3 people in the Wuhan lab got sick with a virus of unknown origin in November of 2019.
And that was more than 1,000 kilometers away from where bats live.
Exactly.
Not only that, lab leaks are common.
Accidents do happen. Labs in Singapore, Taiwan, and China accidentally infected themselves with SARS.
SARS escaped from labs. So did smallpox, anthrax, and flu. Now the FBI and others agree with Senator Paul.
The Department of Energy has concluded COVID-19 likely came from a lab leak in China.
So evil Chinese scientists in a lab funded by America?
America funded it, and I think it was maybe not done with evil intentions. It was done with misguided notion that gain-of-function research was safe.
Gain-of-function research. That can mean making viruses stronger.
They sometimes create viruses that don't exist in nature that are now more infectious. They've gained the function of lethality or infectiousness by being combined in a lab.
They're trying to find ways to stop diseases.
But many scientists have now looked at this and said, we've been doing this gain-of-function research for quite a while. The likelihood that you create something that creates a vaccine that's going to help anybody is pretty slim to none.
The media is weirdly uncurious about this.
We have a disease that killed maybe 16 million people worldwide, about 1 million people in America, and they're not curious as to how we got it. You're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
Senator Paul details his arguments in this new book, Deception, the Great COVID Cover-Up. It points out that Fauci once justified the risks of gain-of-function research.
He said in 2012, even if a pandemic occurs, if a scientist becomes infected and the community becomes infected, the knowledge is worth it. Well, that's a judgment call, and I would say there's probably 16 million families around the world who might disagree with that now.
Dr. Fauci didn't give your money directly to the Chinese lab. He gave it to a nonprofit called EcoHealth.
EcoHealth Alliance is working on the ground to stand between you and the next pandemic.
EcoHealth Alliance. Most Americans haven't heard of it.
They were able to accumulate maybe over $100 million in U.S. taxpayer dollars, and a lot of it was funneled to Wuhan.
EcoHealth is run by zoologist Peter Daszak.
Set our sights on the next pandemic. We can stop it emerging. We can save lives.
Before the pandemic, Daszak bragged about combining coronaviruses in Wuhan in hopes of creating a vaccine.
My colleagues in China did the work. You create pseudoparticles, you insert the spike proteins from those viruses, see if they bind to human cells. And each step of this, you move closer and closer to this virus could really become pathogenic in people.
The spread of a new deadly disease.
Once COVID broke out, Daszak was less eager to talk about the experiments he funded.
Peter Daszak has refused to reveal his communications with the Wuhan lab, and I do think that ultimately there is a great deal of culpability on his part.
In addition, Daszak and Fauci got other scientists to sign this letter, published in a prestigious medical journal, saying they
strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin.
They squelched all dissent and said, you're a conspiracy theorist if you're saying this. but they didn't reveal that they had a monetary self-incentive to cover this up.
We asked Staszak to answer the claims in this video. He didn't respond.
To give you an example of who he is and how the money changes hand, this is a guy who has $15,000 cocktail parties at the Cosmo Club in D.C., invites Anthony Fauci and others there for cocktails.
They're really criticizing science because I represent science.
I think he is the defender of the funding of science, the business of science.
And what about the NIH, run by our government?
They are still funding gain-of-function research.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a risk to civilization because we could wind up with a virus that's 50% lethal, that leaks out of a lab and kills half of the planet.
Paul's book reveals much more about Fauci and EcoHealth. We'll release our full interview in a few weeks.